What's something obvious that you only just realized? Story 1. I recently discovered that honey isn't spicy. My husband was buying a bottle of hot honey, and I made some comments about the ridiculous marketing since all honey is already spicy. Turns out I'm just allergic. I remember someone on Reddit saying that in their 20s they made a comment to a friend about not liking strawberries because of the spicy tingle flavor afterward. Was then shocked when everyone had no idea what they were talking about. They learned that they were allergic to strawberries. It's actually crazy how many people have a random mild allergy that just causes something small like that with no real harm, and it just flies under the radar until they're 37 and randomly mention it to someone who says it's not supposed to do that. Even better when you have a mild random allergy like that, and then one day when you're 33, random factors combine and ta-da, you're part of the EpiPen club because that random mild allergy sent you into a very confused bout of anaphylaxis that you don't realize is anaphylaxis until your doctor doesn't laugh along with you when you're relating the story to them, that instead gives you the look until you shut up before telling you that you're lucky to have survived, and please go to the ER next time before prescribing you an EpiPen and handing you a paper with the descriptions of anaphylaxis and when to call 911 and use your Epi. Please don't ask me how I know. I had this twice in my life, first with the clam strips from Big Boy. I tried but didn't like that they were savory, tingly, pop rocks. Yeah, shellfish allergy. Most recently was yellow mustard. In an effort to stop using artificial colors, a lot of brands have started using paprika to give it the tiniest hint of orange, but the label will usually just say spices. I was complaining to my husband that I can't find yellow mustard that isn't spicy anymore, and it turns out it was the paprika. I can't have nightshades, and the sensitivity has gotten much worse in the last couple of years. Happened to me with cilantro. Never really had it in my life. Started working at a game studio and they'd do a weekly catered lunch. I always hated it when cilantro was in it because it was spicy. Thought it might be that genetic thing where people don't like it. No one mentioned ever that it just tastes like soap, which I actually like the taste of. And then one day I googled it and it turns out it's kind of citrusy, not spicy. Spicy for a non-spicy thing means allergy. I was like 26 or 27 at the time. Story 2. For the longest time, I always thought prima donna was pre-Madonna. You're not alone. I only found out one day when I was watching a movie and that phrase was said and I had subtitles turned on. I remember one time when I was a kid, maybe in middle school. My dad used prima donna in a sentence and I made some comments like, I didn't think the topic of conversation happened before Madonna's fame. He got a good chuckle out of it and was like, no, that's not what that means. But I really didn't know. I just learned what it actually meant. Fun fact, the origin of the word apron started in a similar way. The original word for apron was napron. So when people asked for a single napron, they would ask for a napron. But to those who didn't know the spelling, it sounded like you were saying an apron. After a couple of decades of this, and voila, now we have aprons. Story 3. I didn't know my mom had a name until in first grade the teacher asked us what our mother's name was and everyone answered, but I never realized my mom had a name. I questioned my entire existence. I went to her straight after school. She was cooking in the kitchen. I asked her, Mama, what is your name? She smiled, stopped cooking, came down to my height, and told me her name. It was a sweet memory, but man, I felt ashamed that I didn't know that sooner. I actually made a little song for my son so that he would be able to remember my legal name and my husband's legal name in case it was ever necessary. I was so worried that he would be insisting my name was Mama in an emergency. I also made up songs for our address and our phone numbers. I got the idea from a blog. Man, this reminds me of back in kindergarten when my teacher asked me what my last name was. I was on the brink of tears because I didn't even know I was supposed to have more than one. My daughter was 4 and got lost in the store. Happy she found an employee right away, they asked her what her mom's name was, and with tears she said, everyone calls her Rachel, but I just call her Mama. Were you raised by a single mom? I had a similar experience. There just wasn't really anyone else around to call her by her name, and my grandparents always called her Mom and themselves, and each other Grandma and Grandpa, when we were with them. How would one know? I didn't know my birthday in first grade. My birthday is on a holiday. When people asked, I told them about the holiday. When I saw the holiday decorations going up, I knew my birthday was coming soon. I could look at the calendar and see my birthday pre-printed on the date, which I did not bother to memorize. I was the only kid in class who didn't even know what month I was born in. I found out because my mom and dad just called for each other throughout the house a few times. I noticed that they were using names instead of mama and papa, and felt so cool, like I had uncovered something that should have stayed a secret for me. I actually went up to my teacher in kindergarten and whispered in her ear that I knew my parents' names and what they were, and felt so cool when I did that. Now it just feels embarrassing to think that I did that. Story 4. So, I'm not a native speaker, which might make this somewhat excusable, but for the longest time I thought sitcoms were named that because the main character spends most of their time sitting in a living room in a bar. This reminded me when I first moved to the US, the sitcom Married with Children was always on, and the title and common phrase really confused me. I read it as literally a man was married to a child, which seemed super grim to me. And as I grew up, I realized it meant a silly way to say, I'm married to a child, because one's partner is immature, aka a child. Then recently, I realized I'm still stupid, and it just means that you're married and have kids as well. I don't know why this phrase didn't click with me. Story 5. I visited Rome with my mom when I was 6 or 7. We were standing in a line to go to the toilet in the Colosseum, and she suddenly pointed to a crack in the wall and said that there was something there. I checked it out, and it was a Roman coin. Of course, I thought that it was real and kept it and told everyone I knew about it. I realized that my mom just staged it all only 10 years later. Still amazing memories, though. My great-great-aunt Flossie had an old magnolia tree in her yard, with a knot in the trunk that was just big enough for me to stick my hand in. My grandma would take me out to play in the yard, and every time we'd check to see if there was anything in our treasure chest. There would always be something, maybe a cool rock, or a feather, or a coin if I was lucky. It wasn't until decades later that I thought about our treasure chest and realized that my grandma had been hiding things for me to find. This reminded me of a story my dad told me. He was a farm boy in Kansas. One day, he was with his dad when their pickup broke down on the dirt road a few miles outside of town. So they had a long walk to get help. On the walk, my grandpa pointed out a 50-cent piece on the road and my dad picked it up. My dad spent the rest of the walk having fun looking for coins on the dirt road, and only realized as an adult that my grandpa had dropped the coin for exactly that purpose. My dad did something similar. When I was 7, he took me to an REM concert. It was one of the coolest moments of my life and really instilled in me a great love of music. Later that night, he gave me a beanie that said the band's name on it and told me that he had an amazing interaction with Michael Stipe, the lead singer of the band, and that he had given my father his beanie to give to me. I told this story constantly throughout my adolescence. I'm 36 now, and it took me until about 5 years ago to really think about it and realize that he probably just got it from the merch booth and made up that story to get me excited. I'm realizing more as I age that my relationship with my father is very similar to the one in Big Fish. He made up and added many details to stories which I'm realizing weren't true, but it really added to the magic of it all. Oh my gosh, I have a similar story. I went to Washington, D.C. with my dad when I was 12 or so. We were outside the Treasury building when I found a $20 bill on the ground. I couldn't believe the odds. My dad took my younger sister years later when I was in my early 20s, and it wasn't until then that I found out. I was talking to my mom about it, and she said, "Your sister had a blast. Your dad pulled the same trick of planting $20 outside of the Treasury building. She loved it." When I was a kid, we took a trip to the beach. My brother was around 5 or 6 at the time, and he somehow learned that there was a possibility that there could be a shark tooth that washed up on the beach, and he was super excited to look for one when he was there. One of the days we were there, my brother excitedly asked my mom if he could walk down the beach to look for shark teeth, and my mom said that she'd go in front of him to help look. Secretly, she was placing shark teeth that she had bought somewhere in the sand and letting my brother find them naturally. It's been 16 years and my brother still has those shark teeth saved in a box somewhere and will bring up how he found so many if we talk about that vacation. My mom let it slip at some point when talking to me, and she specifically said to never, ever tell my brother. I don't think he knows my Reddit account, but if he does, hey John, I'm sorry. Story 6. A few years back, I realized that the Christmas song I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus wasn't actually about the mother being unfaithful and putting out for Saint Nick, but it was just the dad dressed as Santa. For almost my entire life, I thought the mom just got around. I was 26 when I realized otherwise. Same, and to add another layer to my obliviousness, I remembered a local radio station playing a parody song I Saw Daddy Kissing Santa Claus. I heard this as a teenager, and I specifically remember that the lyrics actually explained that Santa was just mommy in disguise. I still didn't put it together that Santa wasn't really Santa in the original version either until I read a response much like yours about 5 years ago. I was thinking about this song today. I always knew it to be about a kid watching his mom and dad kissing while the dad was dressed as Santa Claus. However, as someone else pointed out on Reddit some other time, the little boy in the song doesn't know his dad is Santa. He thinks Santa is real, so he's seeing his mom kissing Santa, not daddy. To the kid, he basically walked in on his mom stepping out. The song is trauma. I realized that as a kid, but then when I was an adult, I realized it makes no sense unless mommy has a Santa fetish. If the dad dressed up as Santa for the kids, he and mom wouldn't be kissing and tickling in front of the kids. Ergo, dad isn't dressed up like that for the kids. It's for the mom. I mean, that might be the intent, but also Michael Jackson sang it. I refuse to think that he would see his wacky-ass dad dressed up as Santa and not see through the disguise. Joe Jackson dressed up as Santa is just Joe Jackson. So in Michael's case, I think he really did see mom kissing Santa. Story 7. Eminem, M&M, Marshall Mathers. He wanted to use the name Eminem, but that would have caused legal trouble. I'll do you one better. When I was a kid, I thought Eminem and Marilyn Manson were the same person doing two very different acts. They were both controversial and they both had two M's in their name. So, to my 13-year-old brain, that meant that they had to be the same person. Story 8. I only learned recently that revenge is a dish best served cold means that you should take your revenge at a much later time when your opponent won't be expecting it. Here I thought that cold revenge was without passion and or empathy. Yours is far better, but somehow less Russian seeming? Or was it Klingon? I bet Khan was right on that. He was from the Earth of old, after all. My dad taught me a kinda sketchy guy version of this quite young, so the expression made immediate sense to me when I encountered it. He taught me something like, you should never fight or be violent. But sometimes you still have to. So if you do, never go in hot or angry. Never reacting. Go in cold and calculate. Don't get in trouble. And don't allow yourself to be hurt. I mean, damn, I wish I could say that advice never came in handy. Story 9. That you can click, don't accept any cookies, and websites work just fine. I always thought that would also disable essential cookies, so would either accept all or go through the motions of only allowing essential ones. As someone who has no idea what cookies are on websites, thank you. I will no longer be accepting them, and I still don't know why. Cookies are used to collect user data. Some of them are essential, for example, your login data, so that you are logged into the website the way you don't have to manually log in every time. Others are simply used to harvest all the data they possibly can, so that they can then sell it. Clicking accept all cookies means you are giving them consent to harvest any and all data they can, so they can and will sell it later on. Clicking reject all cookies / reject all non-essential means they can only save essential data to make sure the site works as intended. There's also the option to choose what cookies you want to accept, which should only be the essential ones. In conclusion, always reject all cookies or accept essential ones only. Story 10. I was 42 when I had an epiphany about water towers / tanks. They're not for storing water for an emergency, they're for storing water for water pressure. I figured it out when I wondered why the water never went off when all the other utilities went out during storms. Felt pretty stupid. As one commenter said when I posted this before, they're not so towns can put their names on them, as if to say, screw you, look how much water we've got. Back in the day, some guys were flying around counting geese and ducks for a migration study. Engrossed in their task, they got lost in the days before GPS, so they buzzed a small town's water tower to read the name, then got out their map. Can someone please elaborate? I still don't get they're for storing water for water pressure. You can store water anywhere, on the ground, underground, but if you have to use a pump to supply the water, then there would be no water when the power goes out. If you have a water tower that is above the highest point you need to provide water to, then gravity does the work in providing water pressure to get the water to town below without electricity. It's not really about electricity going out. Water towers are just how we pressurize the municipal water supply. The demand on the system is not constant. It peaks a few times a day, usually in the morning and right after people are getting home from work. Water towers let us smooth out those peaks. If you use pumps directly, you have to size them to be able to handle the peak flow. Then most of the time they're oversized, so you're wasting money. Those peaks also tend to correspond to when electricity demand is highest, and therefore the most expensive. You could also have an instantaneous demand drop the pressure in the whole system while the pump ramps up to keep up. If you pump all the water into a tower first, you can size the pumps for the average flow and just keep them on steady all the time, which is much cheaper because you get to buy smaller pumps and don't need to cycle them as often, which can reduce their lifespan. It lets you pump overnight and off-peak times too, when electricity is cheaper. It also makes it much harder for a sudden surge to demand to drop the pressure of the system. Keeping pressure when the electricity goes down in a storm or something is really just an added bonus. The thing about pilots reading the city name on the water tower isn't just a story from the past, it is something that is still taught by lots of instructors as a backup for when you get lost. I did my training in 2004, and we did have GPS back then, but the training was done without GPS so that it wouldn't limit our learning at the time. Kind of like how learning to drive a stick-shift car, because then you can drive anything. My instructor mentioned the idea of looking at a water tower to identify the city, and I talked to other pilots who had the same experience as other instructors. So pressure is part of it, but water treatment plants also have pumps and generators, so during power outages they are often fine and they can make their own water pressure. Tanks are important for meeting peak demand. Towns use a lot of water in the morning, when everyone is getting up and going to bed, taking showers and whatnot, but barely any at night. So plants can make water at a constant rate throughout the day and night, and not have to be sized up to meet maximum demand. During the day the tanks go down, and at night they fill back up. Story 11. I had no idea that they moved the holes on a golf course. I'm 32 years old. I always thought the concept of golf was mega boring anyway, but playing the same course over and over again? Who would even bother? No one would, which is why they moved the holes. I worked as a greenskeeper for several years, and one of my tasks was to move the location of the holes and tees every morning, which was primarily done to avoid wearing out the same patch of grass because most of the wear happens within several feet of the hole, especially at a busy golf course. It was up to me where the hole would go, and I'd usually pick a random spot, but if I was in a mischievous mood, I'd put it in a challenging location, like near a side with a bunker or next to a slope that was on the green itself. Even besides the holes, most average and even above average golfers never play each hole the same, no matter how many times they play it. Part of the beauty of the sport. Every subsequent hit has enough variation to change where the ball lies in the course. Your tee shots might be generally the same, but the rest of the hole plays differently every time. Part of the thrill of playing a single course again and again is the familiarity with the distances, elevations, etc. Eventually, you'll have exceptional experiences at each hole and remember it. The first time you birdie hole 7, sink that chip shot from the crazy deep bunker on 12, it becomes addicting to conquer a course or certain holes. It really helps you dial in your judgment and club choices. To be fair, I don't think it would change the game too much to never move the tees or holes. The vast majority of players don't play enough, or aren't good enough to master the game to the extent that the minor differences in the hole locations are a big deal. The vast majority of players are trying to get consistent off the tee, from the fairway, from the rough, out of the sand, to putt consistently, etc. Story 12. For me, it wasn't until recently that I found out I'm allergic to cucumbers. I used to think the numbness they caused in my mouth was normal, similar to how peanuts affect me. It turns out I'm also allergic to peanuts. which I only learned about recently too. Ha, I don't know yet what exactly I'm allergic to, but a few years ago I had a conversation with someone where I was like, don't you hate when something is so sweet it makes your throat tickle? And the other person was like, no? Turns out there's some preservative in certain buttercream frosting, fudge, etc. that I'm allergic to. I just haven't figured out exactly what it is yet. I'm allergic to coconut. Breakfast bars always made my mouth itchy growing up. Found out later that most of them use coconut oil because it's supposedly healthier. I was this way with pecans, though I hated them. Then I was at dinner at a thing in college, and the only dessert was pecan pie. It was so freaking good. So I started eating pecans and realized my tongue got itchy and tingly, and when I cracked freshly picked ones, my eyes would get itchy and I would sneeze like crazy. Something with the oil. I can eat them if they are roasted, dry, and cooked a ton. Story 10. For a while, I even confused astigmatism with astigmatism, so I assumed that a person could also have two stigmatisms. I feel like the tech at my eye doctor set me up for this. I always said astigmatism as one word, until I called to make my appointment and told her that's what I thought I had. She repeated it back to me twice, as just stigmatism. So I think, oh crap, this is her correcting my dumb mistake. I won't repeat it in front of the doctor when I see her. I don't want to look like a fool. I was sure to then say stigmatism in my appointment, until my doctor literally started saying astigmatism, very plainly during her diagnosis. I should have just Googled it. When I was young, I thought the word for coma/comatose was a coma, because people always said it so fast as one, like, the guy in the show was in a coma. I was like 14 when I said something to the extent of, oh, he's in an coma, to my mom, and she looked at me like I'm an idiot and explained. I did similar to this, but the opposite with hernias. I had a hernia when I was a baby and a scar, so I grew up with my parents saying I had a hernia, which I needed an operation for, but I understood it as a hernia. It wasn't until I was 18 or so, when a friend's dad was having an operation for one, that I asked him if his hernia was all sorted. Felt like a right fool that I didn't even know the name of the thing I had myself. Story 14. That stripper poles spin. I always wondered how they spun so fast without burning their skin. Poles can be in a spin mode, which means they spin on their own axis, or they can be in a static mode, which means they don't spin. Most good quality poles can be switched back and forth from spin mode to static mode with an Allen key or by flipping a switch. Dancing on spin mode and static mode both have their own pros and cons. Source: I'm a pole dancer. Do you ever get motion sickness from spinning too much? Pole dancers go through stages of training to even be able to get to the point where they can spin enough to get dizzy. Static pole training: 1. Grip and hold. 2. Climb. 3. Formations with various grips and orientations, both facing the pole and facing away from the pole, and right side up and inverted, and left and right grip. 4. Climb to the top and execute various formations on the way up and down. Then comes the spinning pole, which adds directional momentum. You retrain your grip strength all over again, and the faster you spin, the stronger your grip needs to be. Source: dated a pole instructor for a year. Bonus: pole performers have insane upper body strength. Don't take what they do for granted. If they're performing well on a pole, they can probably arm wrestle you pound for pound and win. My pole instructor X, a fantastic woman and still one of my best friends, is the strongest woman I've ever met. Story 15. In interviews, when they say, "Tell me about yourself," they mean it as it pertains to work, not generally about yourself. And thank goodness, I don't want to tell them about myself. As a manager who does a lot of hiring, I would like it if someone answered this question with some genuine info about themselves rather than some robotic brag about their academic qualifications and pedigree. Would much rather hear, "Well, I was born in the Scottish Highlands, had an idyllic upbringing raising cows with my family, spent Friday nights at the local disco." The details of my life are quite inconsequential. My father was a relentlessly self-improving boulangerie owner from Belgium with low-grade narcolepsy and a penchant for buggery. My mom was a 15-year-old French prostitute named Chloe with webbed feet. My father would womanize, and he would drink. He would make outrageous claims like he invented the question mark. Sometimes he would accuse chestnuts of being lazy. The sort of general malaise that only the genius possesses, and the insane lament. My childhood was typical. Summers in Rangoon, luge lessons. In the spring, we'd make meat helmets. When I was insolent, I was placed in a burlap bag and beaten with reeds, pretty standard really. At the age of 12, I received my first scribe. At the age of 14, a Zoroastrian named Velma ritualistically shaved my testicles. There really is nothing like a shorn scrotum. It's breathtaking. I highly suggest you try it. I just remembered when I had an interview for a shoe shop at like 19 and they asked us to design a superhero for the group interview. It wasn't until everyone else was presenting their superheroes I realized that this was supposed to be a way for us to think of good qualities used for working in retail, and not just as a fun exercise in designing a superhero. Mine had the power to control all animals. I did not get the job. I am autistic. For literally 2 years, I desperately wanted a job, but failed interview after interview based on my answers to questions like that. It is painful to remember the way I used to answer that question before I knew all interview questions had to be about the question as it relates to the interview, and not just an objective discussion. Nothing like having everyone around you insist you're a bum who doesn't want a job when you go to every interview you can and try so hard, but have no understanding of why they won't hire you. After those 2 years, I gave up. I went 3 more years convinced no one would hire me until I found out I'm autistic and studied interviewing. Now I get almost every job I apply for. Story 16. An old archaeologist moved in next door when I was about 6, and he asked me to go look in his driveway to help find fossils that he might have dropped while moving in. I found 2 that I still have to this very day. He told me to keep them. I was an adult before I realized he placed them there for me to find. He was a very nice old professor, not to mention how cool I became in the eyes of my friends for owning fossils. My grandmother gave me an 1880s penny when I was about 7. She told me she found it in her chimney and I might want it. I started collecting coins. Not seriously, just the fun Royal Mint circulated ones and some commemorative coins, since proper old coins are really expensive. She left me her coin collection when she died. Hundreds of pre-decimal coins. She never found it in her chimney, but it made me very happy. Story 17. My dad was 50 when he realized that sea glass wasn't a living creature. We realized his stupidity when he said, "Wow, they look just like real glass. Nature is so beautiful." We were like, "What the heck do you mean?" He thought it was a living animal of some sort that just happened to look and feel like glass. We were big shellers at the time, so he was very familiar with the beach. There's really no explanation for this one. I've only been to the ocean once, and I don't remember seeing anything on the beach that looked like glass. Are you talking about where people throw waste glass in the ocean, and after it tumbles around for a while, it looks like a glass rock? Or are you talking about when lightning strikes the sand and it turns into glass? It has a different name, but I can't remember what it is right now. Those are the only 2 things I can think of. Story 18. Recently, I learned that making eye contact doesn't mean staring directly into a person's eyes without looking away. It always made me really uncomfortable to do that. What helped me to know, the person talking keeps eye contact and occasionally looks away while talking to relieve the situation. The person listening maintains eye contact and does not look away, as long as the person speaking is looking at them. If it's difficult, you can look between the eyes and at the forehead. There's also the subtle pickup people use in bars, where if you're looking around in a place with lots of people, you make eye contact with someone, your usual reaction is to then look away immediately because you aren't locked in a conversation. But if it's someone you might be interested in, you hold it for a little extra longer, and if they do as well, then it's a match. But if you don't go up and introduce yourself after the first lock, as that might have been a mistake, nor after the second because that might have just been a, "Hey, where have I seen you before?" Re-look. It's after the third, once both of those previous hurdles have been passed, and you're cleared for landing. And one of you should move to talk to the other at that point. It's not something most people know about, but it's paid off dividends to a lot of folks I've explained it to. So there's that. Hey, at least I made a new friend. At the very least, a firm handshake and, "I'm X, what's your name?" And you're off to the races. Sit, have a chat and a spell, and get some drinks. It'll be fine because you two have cleared a connection that you didn't even realize you had. Story 19. This is an embarrassing one. I grew up with a lisp and spoke pretty much just like Neil Goldman from Family Guy. Never went to speech therapy, nor has anyone tried to help correct me. That's just how I spoke. I was self-conscious about it. Classmates jabbed at it, but nothing too serious. It wasn't until after high school at 19 that I was just randomly making silly sound effects with my mouth when I placed my tongue in a certain position and noticed, hey, this sounds like a normal way to talk. Is this where my tongue was supposed to be this whole time when I spoke those words? From that moment on, I spoke normally. It was a huge revelation for me, but I also felt so idiotic. I had a lisp too, and only got rid of it when people started making fun of me in high school. It was like I had to train myself to get in the habit of speaking normally. Never did I connect tongue position to it though, and I did have speech therapy. When I used to drink, it would sometimes come back when I was drunk. Story 20. I typically need to look up the definitions of words that I thought I understood. For example, the word triage. I always thought it meant to help or aid people who come into a hospital until they can be seen by a doctor or surgeon, etc. And I even extended it to mean when someone is really sick, isolate that person or give them a mask. I didn't know it was purely a way to categorize people to determine what order they'll be seen due to how severe their condition is. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.